We're up to mitzvah number 148, and this is the prohibition, the restriction against eating blood. If you have a kosher animal, you can eat it. But we saw last time that there are certain fats, the forbidden fats, that you cannot eat. You can eat the whole animal, but not certain parts. That is true as well with blood. Blood is part of the animal, but it's prohibited to be consumed. And in a few places in the Torah, the commentaries tell us in 7 distinct places in the Torah, we are warned against the consumption of blood, which is why kosher meats are always salted to remove the blood in order to not violate mitzvah number 148, the prohibition against the consumption of blood. Now, the commentaries tell us a variety of different reasons as to why there is a prohibition, or what could be some of the lessons for us why there is the prohibition against the consumption of blood. And the Sefer Chinuch, which is the book that we are primarily using to navigate the 630 mitzvos, he tells us the same idea that he mentioned with respect to the forbidden fats. It's not healthy. The first thing he says, it's not healthy. And the body, well, it needs to serve as a vehicle to execute the agenda of the soul. And if the body, well, if it becomes less healthy, then it's going to imperil the body's ability to help effectuate the agenda of the soul. And therefore, it's a very basic idea. Everything the Torah tells us that we cannot consume is actually not good for us, and therefore it's bad for our health, and therefore it's going to be prohibited. And then he adds a deeper point. He says that an animal, its life, it's found in its blood. Just as a human, right? The oxygen that gives vitality and continuity to the animal is found in the blood. And if someone were to consume that, that would breed cruelty. It will change a person's disposition, their temperament, and it'll make him more cruel. And therefore, it's imperative to avoid blood, to avoid the consumption of blood, because even a little drop of it will have an effect on how we interface with the world, our character, our disposition. It will make us more cruel, and of course, we're trying to refine ourselves and make ourselves more elevated, and therefore we must avoid the consumption of blood. Now, the Ramban, of course, one of the foremost commentators on the Torah, he has a whole essay about the prohibition against the consumption of blood. And he cites the Rambam, Maimonides, so Nachmanides cites Maimonides, and he talks about some of the metaphysical reasons behind this prohibition. He talks about the Rambam, Maimonides. There were a group of people called the Chaldeans, the Kasdim. Abraham, he was born in Ur-Kasdim, and he, of course, emerged in a very idolatrous society. And the Rambam tells us that these idolaters, they wanted to connect to demons and to the dark arts and to use that as a way to have like a twisted version of prophecy to be able to forecast the future. And they hated blood, and they found it very distasteful, but they did it nonetheless. They would drink blood of animals because that would help them connect to the shadim, to the demons, and that would be a way that they would advance their idolatrous agenda. And because the Torah wants us to not only reject idolatry, but everything that's associated in any way with the ways of the idolaters, in order to dispel their notions, we're told a special mitzvah to do the exact opposite of what they did. They sought deliberately to consume blood. The Torah says, go out of your way to eliminate every little drop of blood from the food you are consuming. And the Ramban points out that the terminology that the Torah uses with respect to someone who consumes blood, it uses a very similar verbiage when it talks about someone who gives over their son to Molech. It was a way of the idolaters. They would take a child and they would sacrifice it to the idol Molech. And the Ramban observes that the Torah, when it talks about Molech and blood, it uses a very similar use of phrase. The verse says in Leviticus chapter 17, I will give my face, I will turn my face in anger, so to speak, towards those who eat blood. And that's a very similar terminology that God displays in the Torah with respect to those who give to Molech. And that tells us that it's a very, very harsh prohibition. It's on some level, tantamount to giving over a son to Molech. Now, the Ramban himself, after citing the Rambam, he offers a variety of reasons as to why there is this prohibition. First thing he says, it's based upon the verse. The verse says, don't eat the blood. The blood should be used for a purpose. It's not like we get rid of the blood. We use it, the blood of the animal. It's used for a specific purpose, namely as a sacrifice. When you sacrifice the animal, the essence of the sacrifice is the blood service that's done with the animal's blood. And it's carried in a special vessel, and it's walked over to the altar, and it's sprinkled upon the altar. Blood, the Ramban tells us, of the animal, is designated for sacrificial use. And therefore, don't use it for your own personal purposes. Don't consume it. Instead, it has a designated use. Use it for that and not for something else. And then he adds, Adam was not allowed to kill animals to consume them. Animal was only allowed to be a vegetarian. He was not allowed to eat meat, or more precisely, he was not allowed to kill animals to consume their meat. And that changed. That policy changed after the flood. After the flood, all the animals, they were only saved in the merit of Noah. The Almighty instituted a change in the world where now, because Noah, he was the one who deserves the credit for the continuity of the animals, he was allowed, him and his descendants, thenceforth, were allowed to actually kill the animals for their own personal benefits. But that permission of consuming animals after the flood, it was limited to the body and to the flesh of the animal, but not to the blood of the animal. And thus, with respect to blood, we still have the extant prohibition from the times of Adam to not consume the blood of the animal. And then he adds, the animals are here for our benefit. For our benefit. And the body of the animals, that's for us to consume. And the blood, that's also for our benefit. But not for the physical benefit of us consuming it. Instead, it's for the spiritual benefit of us using it as a sacrifice and earning, through the blood of the animal, earning the spiritual benefit of expiation and atonement. And then he adds, an animal has a soul on some level, and souls, they're for God. Human soul, the animal soul, it's for God, it's not for us. And finally, the Ramban offers another interpretation, which is similar to what the Sefer Chinuch says. Humans have souls, animals have souls. And the soul of man, the verse tells us, it's found in the blood. The blood is almost the glue that connects the body and the soul. And that's true by the humans, and it's true by the animals. And although it is true that animals have some level of a soul, it's not a human soul. It's a much more a spiritually lower soul. And if you were to consume blood of animals, you're mingling the human soul, the eternal soul, the lofty, elevated, ethereal soul with the lowly, animalistic soul. And you're going to taint and tarnish and dilute and render coarse and callous the very fine spiritual soul that you were endowed with. And therefore, it is imperative to avoid that if you don't want to corrupt and sully and darken and weaken and damage your soul. And then he adds, the blood doesn't get digested, so it's just going to be there, and it's going to be a problem if you were to consume it. Avoid blood, mitzvah number 148. Now, the Sefer Chinuch tells us that this is only true with respect to certain species. Fish blood. Fish blood, is that permitted? So the halacha is that actually the blood of fish is permitted. It's not included in this violation. And there's a problem because, the fish blood could be indistinguishable from animal blood. So if you're just drinking blood, which I'm saying it sounds repulsive, but let's say you were to do it, fish blood is permitted. However, if other people see you drinking blood and it looks like it's animal blood, you have a different problem. And that is the fact that other people are going to think that you're eating something which is prohibited. And therefore, if you could find a way that everyone knows it's fish blood and not animal blood, you are allowed to drink it, if you are thus inclined. And therefore, what the solution is that they place some of the scales of the fish in the blood, in the mixture, and that would render it permitted. Again, it's not on the menu necessarily, and you're not obligated to eat it, but it's not included in this prohibition. However, of course, that's only with respect to a kosher animal. A non-kosher animal, non-kosher fish, their blood is prohibited because anything which is derived from a non-kosher animal, it is prohibited, is not kosher like a non-kosher animal itself. For example, you have an egg. Is it kosher? It depends. Is it an egg from a kosher animal? Then it's kosher. If it's an egg from a non-kosher animal, then it is non-kosher because it is a derivative of a non-kosher animal. What about human blood? Interesting. He addresses this. So, of course, he's not talking about, someone wants to just consume human blood like some sort of psychopath. He mentions, what happens if you're flossing? When you haven't flossed in a while, you floss and your teeth get bloody. So the halacha is that you are allowed to swallow that blood. It's not included in this prohibition. If someone has a bloody mouth or something like that, they don't have to worry. They'll always be expelling the blood out of the mouth. That is not included in this prohibition. So blood is prohibited and it must be removed. How is it removed? So the Sefer Chinuch does give us a little bit of a description of what they do. They have to salt it. So you have a piece of meat, right? Slaughter the animal. Animal's kosher. You inspect the animal post slaughtering. It's a healthy animal, so it's not a treifa. It's fine. It can be consumed. You must salt it to remove the blood. First thing you do is you rinse it really well, and then you apply a thick layer of salt on either side, and you leave it for about 20 minutes on a slope. Why? So that way the blood can drain out, or you put it in a strainer so it could drain out. And after that, after 20 minutes, you remove the salt and you rinse it in water again. And you see is the water clear or not? If it's not clear, you do it again. You do this several times where you constantly are salting it to see until the water comes out clear. And once that is done, it is kosher. And even if there were some red juices that come out after salting, sometimes you make a steak, right? And it's got those red juices on top. Now you may think that's blood. He says, no, that's actually not blood. That's the juice of the meat. He calls it the wine of the meat. And it is permitted, again, provided that it was sufficiently salted when it was rendered kosher. Then he tells us that there are certain parts of animals that are so drenched with blood that it's not sufficient to salt it, then they must be roasted as well. You roast them on a fire and the blood drips out. And they are specifically certain organs, like animal brains, sweetbreads. One of the great marketing ploys of all time. You don't call it cow brains, you call it sweetbreads. That sounds much more enticing, appetizing. Or liver. animal liver, very healthy, lots of iron. You want chopped liver, right? It must be roasted in addition to being salted. If it's not roasted, it's a problem. There's the concern that it may still have blood inside of it. And the Sefer Chinuch adds that this is a ubiquitous custom, and every custom that we have, it's like Torah. And we have a custom that you have the liver and you must roast it first to remove the blood. And if you breach a custom, you're going to be bitten by a snake based upon a verse in Scripture. So we have the process of salting and roasting when it is appropriate, thus removing the blood and rendering the meat, kosher for consumption. There are a few interesting comments in Rashi that I want to share with you to wrap up this mitzvah. The verse in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 23. The verse says, Rak chazak, strengthen yourself to not eat blood. And Rashi observes that this is an unusual terminology. Blood, most of us, we're not desirous of it at all. It's repulsive. The notion of consuming blood is very distasteful for us. So why does the verse have to say, you should be very careful, you should strengthen yourself, be extra careful to not have any blood? So Rashi tells us, citing from the Midrash, if the Torah tells us about a mitzvah that we are not inclined to pursue, that we are repulsed by, a forbidden thing that we're not desirous of, and even with that, the Torah says, be strengthened, be careful, be extra vigilant to not violate this, all the more so when it comes to the mitzvahs, the things that we actually are desirous of, and we have to struggle with our Yetzer Hara to overcome. With regards to those things, just imagine how much vigilance is required. And that's on the negative side. To not do it, be very careful to do it. And if the Torah warns us about this, just imagine how careful we have to be with all those other things that we are desirous of. And then, 2 verses later, we have another interesting verse. The verse repeats, don't eat the blood. And it gives us the reward. Laman yitav lach, God will do good for you. Ulevanecha acharecha, to your children afterwards. You listen to God and you avoid the blood, God will give you blessing and goodness for you and for your children. Think about that. What amazing reward for a mitzvah that we're not even desirous of. We don't want. This is not a challenge for you. To not steal, to not covet, to not be envious, to love your fellows yourself. Forbidden foods that are more enticing. Those things we desire. This we don't desire at all. And still the reward is so amazing. And again, Rashi makes the observation. The Torah tells us the incredible reward of not eating blood. God will do good for you and for your descendants. Imagine what this reveals to us, Rashi tells us. If blood that a person despises, a person is not interested in consuming at all, nevertheless, someone who abstains from it, someone who withdraws themselves from it, they merit goodness, not just for them and for their descendants, all the more so. Gezel, theft, arayos, sexual promiscuity, that a person's inclination is to be very desirous of. How much reward will someone be given for refraining from those things which are enticing? 2 incredible observations, courtesy of Rashi. We have to be careful with every mitzvah, because if the Torah tells us a mitzvah that we are not predisposed to be chazak, to be strong and vigilant in avoiding, all the more so things that we are desirous of, and the flip side, the reward, incredible reward for avoiding blood. Imagine how much reward there will be for avoiding the things that we have predisposition towards, we have an inclination towards, we are desirous of. Mitzvah number 148, to not eat blood. And my email address is rabbi@wolbe.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.